How's that?
Floor is all yours. Welcome.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon. On behalf of the members of the Aerospace Industry Association of Canada, thank you for including us in your study on the aircraft certification process. Aerospace stands as one of our country's proudest achievements, providing 215,000 jobs and $25.5 billion annually to the Canadian economy. But it's also a sector facing increasing fierce global competition. Frankly, Canada is falling from behind from a competitive standpoint. That's why our association launched Vision 2025, a pan-Canadian industry-led initiative just over a year and a half ago. We travel across the country engaging our members, federal and provincial governments, and our 215,000 employees. The process resulted in a comprehensive report that outlines the industry's concerns, and we also provided recommendations. One of the key priorities identified involved Transport Canada's certification process and ensuring that its status as a world-class regulator. I like to say right off the top that AIAC has full confidence in TCCA's work to certify aircraft. We do, however, have some recommendations from an organizational and resource perspective. I'll start with the organizational structure of TCCA. While my remarks today are not intended to criticize, in fact, we feel TCCA has an unparalleled commitment to safety. However, opportunities exist to improve efficiencies in its interaction with industry. Currently, TCCA is the only major civil aviation regulator that is structured within a government department. This isn't the case with our major trading partners. The USA, Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, and European Aviation Safety Agency, EASA, are different. TCCA is hampered by a structure that places it in competition with multimodal transport Canada, within a multimodal Transport Canada, and with a complicated internal reporting structure. AIAC Civil Aviation Technical Committee, comprised of industry representatives and subject matter experts, have reviewed that structure and made the following recommendations. TCCA should be structured within Transport Canada as a standalone branch with proper autonomy, authority, and accountability. A senior level official with relevant aviation experience, ADM or higher in our view, should be appointed with overall responsibility for civil aviation matters in Canada. A strong and clear mission statement for civil aviation should be issued, and finally, work with us at AIAC to reestablish and invigorate the Canadian Aviation Regulatory Advisory Council, or CARAC, to ensure industry is working with government to assess and recommend potential regulatory changes through cooperative rulemaking. That brings me to the investment side. Our industry is growing at a rate of 5% a year, yet investments at TCCA are not keeping pace. Our most important trading partner, the United States, funds the FAA in a very proactive and transparent manner. It's a matter of public record. AIAC Civil Aviation Technical Committee recommends the following. The Government of Canada create a high-level stakeholder team, industry stakeholders as well as Transport Canada, tasked with the following. Identifying the staffing and funding requirements by the TCCA, and identifying fair and practical methods of achieving this staffing and funding. The team should be mandated to provide their findings and recommendations within a short, defined timeline, and this should occur in parallel with improving the efficiency of the organizational structure of TCCA. I'll wrap up by just reiterating that it's imperative that TCCA's reputation as a leading civil aviation regulator be protected and enhanced. These recommended changes, we feel, will ensure that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Who's next? Ms. Damant.
Thank you.
You're up.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chairs, and members of the TRAN Committee. I would like to thank the committee for undertaking this important review of Transport Canada's aircraft certification process and extend my sincere condolences to those who have lost loved ones in the tragic events that have led to this study. Let me introduce myself. My name is Jody Diamond, Joanne to some. I'm a professional engineer with a specialty in aircraft certification. I spent 18 years at Transport Canada, civil aviation, and for the past 14 years, I've been the chief engineer for airworthiness and certification at Pratt & Whitney Canada. I've been extensively involved in the development, the application of design standards, the aircraft certification, validation, and delegation processes, and implementation of safety management systems. I'm here today in an individual capacity because I've been involved in this process for over 30 years, and I'm well qualified to explain how it works and how it can be improved. As Mr. Quick indicated here, Canadian industry is a world leader in design and production of aircraft, helicopters, gas turbine engine products, and Transport Canada is recognized as having one of the most robust type certification processes in the world, resulting in an exceptional level of product safety. As state of design under ICAO, Transport Canada is now responsible for the type certification and continued airworthiness of over 18,000 aircraft today and helicopters, and over 60,000 Pratt & Whitney Canada engines currently flying in the world, including Canada. The type certification of aircraft and engines, which is exceptionally complex, as the Transport Canada representatives explained in February, it's just the starting point of aviation safety before the products enter service. It's very, very critical, though. It's a partnership, and it's where there are very defined roles, obligations, accountabilities of the parties involved in the certification process. I'm going to go through it very quickly. There are the regulators. You heard from Ms. Fox about ICAO, okay? Transport Canada, FAA, the regulators. There's the applicant, which is us in industry, represented here, and delegates. I have to stress that however it's been characterized, the system is not self-certification and it's not regulation at all. Very simply, starting at the top, ICAO, which Ms. Fox talked about, is an international body. It's a special agency of the UN, in place since 1944. Canada is a main signatory, and obviously ICAO is headquartered here. It defines the high-level responsibilities, the requirements, processes that are used by countries and regulators and the industry to design and certify a safe product. It drives bilaterals and harmonization. Note that this approach is unique to the aviation sector. There are no other industry that has this model of international regulation, governance, and oversight. Okay? Transport Canada, based on the ICAO requirements, defines the design standards and the processes to establish the product level of safety and the acceptable methods to demonstrate requirements to these. The acceptable methods to demonstrate compliance, how to prove it. Industry, the companies that design the products, we're called the applicant. We have to design the product using many, many suppliers and our own expertise. We have to design it to meet those design standards. That can take years. Then we have to prove it to ourselves, but more importantly to Transport Canada, that the product complies or meets all those design standards that are set by Transport Canada and that the product is safe. For an aircraft, there are over 1,200 requirements. For an engine, there are at least 100. Each and every one of those, we have to prove it meets those requirements. Transport Canada will only approve that aircraft or engine once the company, the industry, has proven each and every one of those requirements has been demonstrated. They have to have confidence in that, okay? At the beginning of the certification process and throughout it, there is constant communication between Transport Canada and the applicant. It's not just at the beginning and then we'll see at the end. It's all the way through. Transport Canada uses a risk-based approach to determine their involvement during the compliance demonstration phase of the process. They focus on safety-critical aspects, new and novel processes, design and compliance methodologies. They witness tests, they read reports, they're in there constantly. Post-certification, the type certificate holder, because we now hold the design approval, has the obligation to monitor the products in the field, identify and analyze issues that could lead to unsafe conditions, work with Transport Canada to introduce required corrective actions, and apply lessons learned for design and certification of new products. It's a continuous improvement cycle. The Transport Canada aircraft certification process is fundamentally robust. It results in an exceptional level of product safety. However, as we know, in the current environment of increasing product complexity and integration, evolving technologies, commercial pressures, the process can be further improved. My recommendations on industry: require organizations involved in product type certification and production to have safety management systems. And let me explain SMS, safety management systems. Canada was a world leader and recognized in rolling out SMS in the early 2000s on our large car 705 operators. It's taken a bit of a hiatus. Many of the committee members may appreciate the journey it's been on. For certification, let me say, SMS does not replace the certification process or requirements at all. They exist as they have been and will be. It complements and reinforces it by requiring an organization's management system to identify and manage product safety risks associated with their business processes and decisions. It requires executive accountability for product safety and development of an organizational safety culture. ICAO has recognized the importance of SMS not just for operations, but also our sector of industry, and has introduced the requirement into ICAO Annex 19. Transport Canada should put the processes and resources in place to evaluate and recognize those organizations that would like to have SMS or should have SMS in a voluntary basis in advance of or in place of rulemaking. They need to mandate SMS. Transport Canada, to echo Mr. Quick's comments, it is very important for the Canadian public as well as for the industries sitting here at the table. They have to maintain their certification competency through retention and development of sufficient qualified experts involved in key steps of the certification and continued airworthiness process. That includes everything from standards development, bilaterals, involvement in the actual product certification processes, and oversight of company processes for certification as well as SMS. In addition, Transport needs to ensure the appropriate organizational structure is aligned with main bilateral partners. With the above suggestions, the current robust Transport Canada certification process and product safety record will be further enhanced. I would like to thank you for your attention. I'd be pleased to respond to questions at the appropriate time on certification, delegation, validation, SMS. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Curtis.
Can you? Good. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for inviting me here today. As clarification, I am CEO of Viking. I am also the executive chair of Longview Aviation Capital, which owns Viking, and a number of other aviation entities in Canada, including de Havilland Canada. So Longview, through its subsidiary companies de Havilland Canada and Viking Air, based in Victoria, Calgary, and Toronto, designs, certifies, manufactures, and modifies commercial turboprop aircraft, including the class-leading Dash 8 Series 400 regional turboprop, the world-renowned DHC-6 Twin Otter aircraft, and the highly specialized Canadair CL-415 water bomber. The Longview group of companies employ nearly 2,000 and 4,000 indirectly within the Canadian aerospace supply chain. And we account today for over $1 billion in sales, of which 95% is exported. With Bombardier's exit from commercial aviation, Longview is now the largest commercial OEM of turboprop-powered aircraft in North America. We own over 23 different aircraft designs, 21 of which were designed and built in Canada over the last many decades. Why is this notable? Certifying new clean sheet aircraft designs is incredibly capital intensive. We only have to look at the recent development of the Bombardier C-Series, now the Airbus A220, to better understand this. Our entire business model is focused on developing second or third product life cycles from robust and proven designs. The Twin Otter, for instance, was first certified in 1965 and in production until 1988. It was out of production for 22 years. Viking restarted production in 2010, went through a robust CPR process with Transport Canada, and has since delivered another 150 of those new variants. The same is true for the Dash 8. First introduced in 1983, derivatives were developed and has extended the production life of the Dash 8 aircraft over 37 years. The aircraft certification process and how CPR, change product rule, is applied is an incredibly important to Longview and our subsidiary companies. The CPR process allows a robust evaluation of the design change with respect to maintaining an acceptable level of safety. The evaluation of newly proposed changes, the proven in-service performance of the aircraft is a fundamental key to identifying the certification basis and ensuring the appropriate means and method of compliance are completed. The early involvement of TC, Transport Canada, in the examination of the design change and the certification aspects enables evidence and risk-based decisions regarding TC involvement throughout the entire certification process. TC's continual engagement with the applicant as the certification progresses allows for the monitoring and adjustments of their involvement as any risk factors change and the appropriate oversight requirements are maintained. Through this oversight and an established system of delegation, TC can rely on the delegated organization to complete the compliance findings with confidence. Both Viking and de Havilland, working through experience with both Viking and de Havilland, through working experience with Canadian airworthiness and operational requirements, have established we have the necessary knowledge and capabilities as organizations to enable authorized persons within our teams to make findings of compliance on behalf of the minister, not as an employee of the OEM. TC is a worldwide and respected leader in aircraft certification. And once the aircraft is certified, as we sell globally, TC becomes a partner in achieving certification in other jurisdictions. They become our advocate. The acknowledgement of the role of TC as a certifying authority from the state of design through strong bilateral agreements with other foreign regulators is critical for our business and to sustain our business. The Twin Otter and the Dash 8 are validated worldwide. This activity would not have been possible without TC maintaining their status as an industry-leading regulator. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Curtis. Mr. Bruce.
Actually, I'm here as a
Mr. Deere.
David. It's sure. Mr. Deere. Yeah.
Thank you. So I'd like to thank the committee for the opportunity to discuss the Canadian certification process. Bell has been developing and manufacturing helicopters at our Mirabel facility for more than 30 years now. To support the certification of our products, we've built a strong relationship with Transport Canada and have held a Transport Canada Design Approval Organization based on the Transport Canada delegation system for over 28 years. In my role at Bell, I'm responsible for the management and certification process for Bell Canada and responsible for validation of our products globally. As such, I've had the opportunity to observe how Transport Canada compares and is viewed by other authorities. I can say that Transport Canada Civil Aviation has a strong reputation around the world as one of the premier certification authorities. Due to Transport Canada's reputation and strong bilateral partnerships, other countries recognize Transport Canada's competence and have trust in Canadian certification process, which ensures aeronautical products like ours, developed and certified in Canada, meet the safety standards that have been established by the world's leading authorities. As mentioned before, Transport Canada uses a risk-based approach to certification. The Transport Canada certification process, with its system of delegation, is effective and it is robust. Transport Canada's oversight, known as level of involvement, is based on assessment of risk to determine where and when they are involved in certification projects, so their attention can be focused on areas that are the most important and have the greatest impact on safety. Bell has developed safe products through an open relationship with Transport Canada. The certification process is structured to initiate communication with Transport Canada early in the product development lifecycle. The Canadian delegation system is mature and is based on trust and includes Transport Canada level of involvement to ensure product safety. Early and open communication between Transport Canada specialists and Bell specialists is encouraged to ensure engagement and common understanding of our design and compliance to the applicable standards. A strong delegation system is necessary to maximize the efficiency of the certification process and ensure Transport Canada resources focus on areas that have the greatest impact on safety. There are finite authority resources to provide oversight of the certification process, so delegation and a strong partnership with Transport Canada is necessary for the success of the Canadian industry. Early collaboration, trust, continued delegation, relying on the OEM's expertise is needed to continue to develop safe products. Strong bilateral partnerships with other major authorities is also essential. If there is trust in Transport Canada's certification process, foreign authorities can focus their attentions on areas of greatest risk as well. We appreciate our partnership with Transport Canada. It's important to Bell that Transport Canada are properly resourced and have a predictable and stable funding to retain a strong international and domestic voice. I would also echo the recommendation from Ms. Diamond about the safety management systems. Bell has already started the process to voluntarily adopt safety management systems within our organization. We've already adopted it in several of our facilities and are in the process of adopting a voluntary safety management system here in Canada as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Deere. Other comments? Mr. Watson?
No further comments.
You're good?
Yep.
Mr. Bruce, you're fine? Yep. Bruce, fine? Great. We'll start off with questions. Mr. Doherty.
Thank you to our guests that are here today. Mr. Curtis, you said that certifying new is a very capital-intensive process. You mentioned the recertification of the Twin Otter and the Dash 8 that your company have gone through. How much change to the airframe was done from in the new certification of both aircraft?
Well, I can speak for Viking on the Twin Otter program.
Right. Sorry. Yep. Go ahead.
And essentially, you know, a number of, in order to meet change product rule and update the certification basis, a number of things, passenger safety had to be addressed, new regulatory requirements around passenger safety, improved avionics systems, situational awareness, a number of lightning strike, all these kinds of things went into it. But structurally, a new Twin Otter compared to a legacy Twin Otter, you wouldn't be able to tell a difference.
Great. Thank you. So if we had an aircraft that had changed an airframe 38% longer, 52% greater of capacity, the size of the engine and the thrust of the engine was 100% greater than previously. The aerodynamics, stable to unstable under certain conditions, was questionable. The length was 38%. The wingspan was 27% wider. In your opinion, should this have been a new type certification?
Well, I'll let Joe, if you want to talk about the Dash 8, I mean, you've seen an aircraft that's evolved from a 37 passenger aircraft.
Specifically with the 737 MAX, given that, should that have been?
I'm not qualified to understand the technical differences in the 737.
Okay. Ms. Diamond, same question.
You asked it differently before, I would say, but that's fine. The evaluation of change product rule means every area of change would have to be evaluated for the impact at the product level. So when people talk about certifying the whole aircraft, in essence, those 1,200 requirements have to be looked at and a decision made about the extent of the change, 38%, different engines, different performance, and the airframer has to reconfirm compliance with the requirements.
So would that be a question, given your background with TCCA, would that be a question that TCCA would have, given the new specs to the aircraft coming out, that they would have questioned?
So every time we do a change, we have to evaluate whether, and you heard this already, it's significant or not significant. And so you look at the extent of change. So we as an applicant have to go to our regulator and say, this is what it is. It's either significant or not significant. Even if it's not significant, we still have to re-demonstrate compliance with every single requirement. None are left out. It's a product level evaluation. What change product rule does is it requires you to look at later safety requirements in the certification basis. And so part of the evaluation will be to look at the extent of the change and determine if there's sufficient change to warrant going to later certification requirements. But certification, no matter what the change, always requires you to look at all the changes and reevaluate against the certification basis.
Mr. Deere, same question.
I can't specifically talk about the 737 MAX, but from a CPR standpoint, we've gone through changes on our products, and every time we go through a change on our product, we have the same process that we have to follow, which is we need to look at the amount of change that we're making on the aircraft in accordance with the guidance material that is available from Transport Canada. And make an assessment in terms of whether or not that is a significant or non-significant change. We make that recommendation to Transport Canada, but at the end of the day, it's Transport Canada's decision in terms of whether or not a change to an aircraft is significant or not significant, and they have the final say in terms of what the certification basis is. Transport Canada, I do know, also do the same kind of, ask the same questions of foreign applicants as well. So when they are looking at a foreign product, they are asking the same questions in terms of the certification basis and how that basis was established.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Deere. Thank you, Mr. Doherty. Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Hold on.
Well,
Insurance, hold on.
sorry.
You pass it over?
Yeah.
Mr. Davidson?
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for appearing here today. We'll always support great Canadian aviation for sure. But I think our focus, we're trying to stay around the 737 MAX. We owe it to the families, and there was definitely a red flag that came up here when the first one crashed. And I think things were missed. We're not trying to complicate things or make it tougher for Canadian aviation. We're just trying to get answers for the family and to make sure this never happens again, what's happened. And to pick up where Mr. Doherty left off, there was, when the 37 MAX was certified to fly, there was over 71 a list of design changes, 71 lists provided by the FAA and Boeing engineers. That's a substantial list compared to the NG model.
Mr. Davidson, if you can get to the question.
Okay. Anyways, do you have any comment of all those design changes that took place? And I'll take this to you, Mr. Curtis.
Short answer, Mr. Curtis, please.
I would, again, I have no information on how the 737 MAX was certified. The only equivalency that I would say is that at de Havilland, Canada, you had a product like the Dash 8 that evolved from a 37-seat aircraft to today a 90-seat configuration, which involved fuselage stretches and all these things. But they went through an incredibly robust process where new and current certification requirements would have to be applied to the aircraft. And that aircraft has been in production for 20 years with over 700 or nearly 700 built. So the process works. I don't know about the 3.7, honestly.
Thank you, Mr. Curtis. Thank you, Mr. Davidson. Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome to our witnesses. And again, condolences to the family members as we discuss this very important topic. Today, we saw a CBC report laying out, commenting on two reports, one from the Ethiopian Investigation Team report, which clearly points the finger at Boeing, and the other from the U.S. House of Representatives report, which I find somewhat disturbing when we think about the comments that they make in their report about the tremendous pressure, financial pressure to get things done, the culture of concealment, hiding flaws with MCIS system from 737 MAX pilots, failure to identify key safety problems. They're questioning the certification process of the FAA, obviously, and I found that somewhat concerning. So given the comments about the FAA and the failure and the shortcomings of what they did and how they collaborated with Boeing on some of these certification processes, why should we continue to trust this certification process? And I guess the question is, how would you expect other countries to react if we withdrew from the international system and stopped recognizing their certification process? And what might be some of the implications be for Canadian companies if other countries no longer recognize Canadian certification? So I'll ask Ms. Diamond to comment on that, and maybe Mr. Curtis.
So if I understand your question, you'd like to understand, just repeating back what you said, what would the impact be if we withdrew?
If we were, how would you expect other countries to react if we withdrew from the international system and stopped recognizing certification process, and what might the implications be for Canadian companies?
Basically, what would happen is we would have every country recertifying our aircraft and our engines. In-depth reviews. We would not, they would not be trusting Transport Canada, presumably. And that's an exceptionally difficult, challenging process. It would be very difficult for us to produce products and deliver them to customers around the world, because they would have to recertify them themselves.
Mr. Curtis, you want
to? I think it would bring our industry to a grinding halt. I would give an illustration of a situation where some countries have competing products, where you're trying to have, and in the instance of the Twin Otter, when we were selling to China, we needed Transport Canada to work with the equivalent Chinese airworthiness authorities to stand behind how Transport had certified the aircraft. And there were a whole bunch of political issues that were preventing the entry of our product into China. And without Transport Canada defending the basis of certification, we wouldn't have aircraft in country.
Thank you. Mr. Deere, how does Transport Canada assist you with certification, and how lengthy is the process, or how rigorous is the process?
So when we start a new certification program, we engage with Transport Canada right away, and the delegation system that we have is based on the relationships that we have with Transport Canada. So we are always in constant communication, using the relationships that we have with Transport Canada to make sure that they understand the configuration of our product, they understand the complexity in certain areas, and then they can make a risk-based decision in terms of where they will get involved in the certification process. So Transport Canada will familiarize themselves with our product through the interaction with ourselves. They will make an assessment of risk, where the areas that would have the most influence on product safety are, and they will target those areas in terms of their level of involvement and where they get involved in the product. At the end of the day, our delegates are the ones that are making the findings of compliance, but the product will never get approved unless the Transport Canada involvement has been completed and they are satisfied that the product is safe.
So do you feel that the Canadian certification process in recent years has made advancements that led to improve safety?
I think the Transport Canada certification process is a very mature process, and because it's a very mature process, there's good working relationships between Transport Canada and their applicants, and at the end of the day, safe products are the result.
So this is for anybody that I guess what if anything sets apart the Canadian certification process from other global certifying entities?
I guess my simple answer to that is the delegation system that Transport Canada has is a trust-based relationship. You don't become a delegate in the Canadian delegation system without the trust from Transport Canada, and that trust requires a relationship. There is a requirement there is a standard which has been set where there needs to be at least a 1-year working relationship with Transport Canada to become a delegate. History has shown that it takes longer than that to be able to get the level of trust that's required. And I think that's one of the key elements in the Canadian system, which is different than some of the other systems, is the element of trust.
Thank you, Mr. Deere. Thank you, Mr. Rogers. We'll now move over to Mr. Bressler-Duval.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. My first question will be addressed to Mr. Deere of Bell Helicopter, and the others can join in if they wish after that. Quite simply, Mr. Deere, in the MCAS system that was on the Supermax, the pilots were not advised of the new system. It wasn't in the manual, which was supplied to crew. It wasn't part of their training. If you had implemented a new system such as that, a significant system, would it have been published in the manual? Would it be included, and would you provide training?
Max, but when we do make changes to our products that are significant in nature, there is an assessment of the training that's required and whether or not there are adjustments required in our training courses.
Est-ce que ce serait la même chose, par exemple, chez Vikinga?
Would it be the same thing with Vikinga? Langley? Viking? Well, were you to introduce a new system, such as the MCAS, or another subsystem or system that would affect the stabilization components, would you have it appear in your pilot manuals, and would you provide some training?
System and whether that was considered a major or minor modification. Anytime you get into changes to control systems of the aircraft, typically they become major modifications and get a much higher level of oversight.
Et ma deuxième question que je pourrais reposer.
And my second question, which I'd like again to offer to the Bell Helicopter people, as well as Viking, if there was some sense of not divulging this change, you install a new system, and you say it's not that significant, it's minor. Would you be able to slip it in, mask it somehow, whether it's Transport Canada or well, I can't remember the acronym there, but the other regulatory agency or certification?